It was late evening in a quiet corner of the city, and Sundar Pichai had just stepped out of a small bookstore he liked to visit whenever he had a few hours to himself. It wasn't like the grand libraries or the luxury offices he was used to. The store had worn-out shelves, a faint smell of old paper, and an old shopkeeper who never seemed to care about who walked in. Sundar liked that. It made him feel invisible for a while, a feeling that was rare for someone whose face appeared in news articles and tech magazines across the world. He stepped into the cool air, holding a bag with two books, one on history, the other on human psychology. The streets were dimly lit, the sound of far-off traffic mixing with the chatter of people closing up their stalls. He didn't bring any security with him today. It was one of those moments when he wanted to be just a man, not the CEO of a global company. As he walked towards his car parked down the block, he noticed a faint shadow moving toward him from the side of the street. It was small, hesitant. At first, he thought it might be a stray dog, but then he heard a soft voice. "Excuse me, sir, Do you have a moment?" Sundar turned, and standing in front of him was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Her hair was messy, tied back with a rubber band that was about to snap, and her dress looked like it had once been white, but was now stained with dust and dirt. She clutched something in her small hand, a glass bottle, empty. There was no fear in her eyes, only a strange mix of determination and sadness. "What is it?" Sundar asked softly, crouching a little so he could meet her eyes. I need milk for my little brother," she said, pointing to a narrow alley behind her. "He's very sick. He hasn't eaten since yesterday." Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. "I promise I will pay you back when I grow up." Those words hit Sundar harder than he expected. Not the request for milk, but the promise. It wasn't something most children would say. It was something a child says when they've already felt the weight of responsibility far too early in life. Sundar looked past her, into the alley. He could barely make out a small figure sitting against a wall. His instinct told him this wasn't a scam or a trick. There was no polished story, no rehearsed plea. This was raw and real. "Where's your mother?" he asked. The girl looked down. "She went out to find work. She hasn't come back yet." She swallowed hard. "She told me to take care of him." Sundar felt a knot in his stomach. He glanced around. There were people passing by, but no one seemed to notice or care. It wasn't the first time he had seen people turn away from need, but it always struck him as deeply wrong. "What's your name?" he asked. "Meera," she replied. "My brother is Arjun." Sundar could have just bought the milk, handed it to her, and walked away. But something about her composure, the way she stood there holding that empty bottle like it was her only chance, stopped him. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's go together." Meera hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to trust him, but then she nodded. They walked together to a small shop at the corner of the street. The shopkeeper looked up suspiciously when Sundar entered with the girl, but said nothing. "2 liters of fresh milk, please," Sundar said. The shopkeeper filled the bottle and Meera held it tightly with both hands as if it were gold. She whispered, "Thank you, sir. I'll pay you back. I promise." Sundar smiled faintly. "You don't have to pay me back, Meera." But she shook her head. "No, I must. Because if I don't, I'll feel like I'm taking something I didn't earn. Mama says we must never take without giving back." He didn't know what to say to that. They walked back to the alley, and when they reached Arjun, Sundar saw how frail the boy was. His cheeks were hollow, and his eyes were half closed. Meera sat down beside him, pouring some milk into a small cup they had, and helped him drink. The boy's face softened almost instantly. It was such a small thing, just milk, but in that moment, it was life. Sundar stood there, not wanting to, intrude but unable to leave. He didn't know why he was feeling this pull in his heart. Maybe because it reminded him of his own childhood in India, when his family had so little but still held on to dignity and kindness. As Meera looked up at him, she asked a question that made him freeze. "Sir, are you the man from the phone pictures at the library?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "The one who made the big machines that tell stories and show games. Mama showed me once." She said he's very important. Sundar smiled faintly. Maybe, he said. But tonight I'm just someone who wanted to help. Before he could say more, a loud voice came from the entrance of the alley. A man in a dirty shirt and torn trousers stumbled in, his eyes scanning Meera and Arjun. What's going on here? He demanded, his tone harsh. Meera tensed instantly, pulling her brother closer. Sundar felt the shift in the air. The man's gaze moved to Sundar, narrowing. Who are you? Why are you here? Sundar could tell this wasn't Meera's father. His stance, the way he looked at the children, it was wrong. Dangerous. The man took a step closer, and Meera whispered, Please. Don't let him take Arjun. And just like that, Sundar realized he wasn't just dealing with a hungry child. Something deeper, darker, was unfolding here. And the next words the man spoke made Sundar's blood run cold. Asterisk, the man's voice was. Rough, carrying the sharp edge of someone used to barking orders, but there was something else in it, too, greed. His eyes weren't on Meera's face or Arjun's hollow cheeks. They kept darting toward the bottle of milk in her hands, almost hungrily, almost like it wasn't meant for the children at all. I asked you a question, the man repeated, stepping closer. His breath smelled of cheap liquor, and his shoulders slouched in the lazy, dangerous way of someone who knew no one in this alley would challenge him. Sundar's mind raced. Every instinct told him to handle this with caution. He could see Meera's knuckles tightening around Arjun's small arm, her body angled protectively in front of him. It wasn't the first time she'd had to stand between this man and her. Brother, I'm a friend, Sundar said evenly, his voice calm but firm. I saw the children needed help. The man snorted. Help? His eyes flicked to Meera. These brats don't need help. They need to learn their place. Meera's jaw trembled, but she didn't cry. Go away, she said quietly, almost in a whisper. The man's expression darkened. What did you say to me? He growled, taking a step toward her. Sundar moved instinctively, placing himself between the man and the children. Leave them alone, he said, his voice lower now. The man gave a mocking laugh. You think you can walk in here and tell me what to do? You have no idea who I am. Maybe not, Sundar replied, but I know what you're doing, and it stops now. The man's eyes narrowed. For a long moment there was silence, only the faint sound of traffic in the distance and the soft, frightened breaths of Meera and Arjun. Then, with a sharp movement, the man reached forward, trying to grab the milk bottle from Meera's hands, but Sundar's hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist before he could touch it. Their eyes locked. Sundar didn't raise his voice, but there was a steel in it that didn't need volume to command attention. I said, leave them alone. The man froze, his surprise visible. Maybe he wasn't used to anyone stopping him. Maybe he'd never been challenged in this forgotten corner of the city. Slowly, Sundar released his grip, still holding the man's gaze. After a tense pause, the man spat on the ground, muttered something under his breath, and backed away, disappearing into the shadows of the Meera, exhaled shakily. She set the milk down beside Arjun and looked at Sundar. Thank you. He comes sometimes. He says we have to give him food because She stopped herself, biting her lip as if afraid to say too much. Sundar crouched down to meet her. Eyes? Meera, where do you live? She pointed to a small door halfway down the alley. It was barely a structure, just wood nailed together, patched with metal sheets. Is your mother there? Meera shook her head. She works at a garment shop. She leaves early and comes back very late. Sometimes not at all if she finds extra work. She says it's the only way to pay rent and buy food. And that man? Her voice dropped to almost nothing. He says he owns this place. But Mama says it's not true. She says he just scares people so they give him things. Sundar felt his chest tighten. The more he listened, the more he realized this wasn't just about a bottle of milk. It was about survival in a world that seemed determined to crush those who had the least. Arjun coughed weakly, and Sundar's attention snapped back to him. Has he been to a doctor? Sundar asked. Meera shook her head again. We can't pay. Mama tried once, but they said we needed money first. Sundar glanced at the boy's frail frame. The way his breathing seemed too shallow. He knew that if something wasn't done soon, this could turn from hunger to something far worse. Come with me, he said finally. Both of you. Meera's eyes widened. Where? To get him checked and to get you both something to eat. She hesitated, glancing toward the end of the alley as if worried the man might return. But what if Mama comes back and we're not here? Asterisk. We'll leave her a note, Sundar said. I promise you'll be back before she has to worry. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Sundar walked with them out of the alley, his mind already forming a plan. They found a scrap of paper and wrote a quick message for their mother, leaving it under a small rock near the door. Asterisk. They reached his car, and Meera's steps slowed. She looked at the sleek vehicle, then at Sundar, confusion in her eyes. Are you really just a friend? She asked softly. Sundar gave her a small smile. Right now, that's what matters. As they drove toward the nearest clinic, Meera kept looking out the window, her small hands still wrapped protectively around the milk bottle, as if she feared it might vanish. Arjun sat beside her, leaning weakly against her shoulder. Every now and then, she would whisper something to him, words Sundar couldn't hear but could feel comfort, reassurance, maybe even promises. At the clinic, Sundar spoke to the receptionist, covering the fees without hesitation. Meera's eyes widened again when the doctor called them in immediately, while the doctor examined Arjun. Sundar waited outside with Meera. The hallway was quiet except for the ticking of a wall clock. Why are you helping us? She asked suddenly. Sundar turned to her. Because you asked for help, and because you were willing to promise something in return, even when you didn't have to. That told me you're someone who keeps her word. Meera looked down, her voice almost a whisper. Mama says, promises are the only thing poor people can give that rich people can't buy. Before Sundar could reply, the doctor stepped out. His expression was serious. We need to talk. He said. A single quote's S grip on the milk bottle tightened. And in that moment, Sundar knew whatever the doctor was about to say, it wasn't going to be simple. Asterisk, the doctor's voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it that made the air feel heavier. We need to talk, he repeated, glancing at Meera and then back to Sundar. Sundar stood, following the doctor a few steps away from the waiting area, but Meera's hand shot out, holding onto his sleeve. Please don't go far, she whispered, her eyes wide. He gave her a reassuring nod. I'm not going anywhere. The doctor waited until they were out of Meera's earshot before speaking. The boy is severely malnourished. His body is extremely weak and he's fighting an infection. His immune system is almost non-existent right now. He paused, lowering his voice. If he doesn't get proper nutrition and treatment soon, he won't last more than a few weeks. The words landed in Sundar's chest like cold stones. What kind of treatment? We'll start with antibiotics for the infection, but that's just the beginning. He needs regular, balanced meals, vitamins, clean water, and a safe environment. Without those, any progress will be temporary. Sundar thought about the alley. The man who had tried to take the milk, and the way Meera had clutched the bottle. As though it was their only hope. A safe environment was not something they had. Do whatever is necessary, Sundar said firmly. I'll cover all expenses. The doctor nodded, but then his gaze shifted. Sir, you should also know. This isn't the first time we've seen cases like this from that part of the city. There's something else going on there. What? Do you mean? Some of these children don't just suffer from poverty. There's intimidation, neglect, sometimes even control by local thugs. They keep people desperate so they can exploit them. If that man I saw outside the alley is one of them, well, these kids are in more danger than you might think. Sundar felt a sharp, protective anger rise in him. I understand, he said, though his voice carried a cold determination now. When he returned to the waiting area, Meera was still holding the milk bottle, her knuckles white. Is he going to be okay? She asked immediately. Yes, Sundar said gently, but we need to make sure he gets stronger. The doctor will give him medicine, and I'll help you both with food and a safe place to stay. Meera's eyes widened. A safe place? Yes, he said. Somewhere that man can't find you. She bit her lip, glancing toward the door as if the very mention of him might summon him again. But Mama ... She won't know where we are? We'll tell her, Sundar promised. But first we make sure Arjun gets better. The nurse came out with a small paper bag of medicine and instructions. Sundar listened carefully, asking every question until he was certain he understood. Meera, too, paid close attention, nodding as if memorizing every word. They left the clinic and headed toward a small food stall Sundar knew, one that served fresh, simple meals. Meera hesitated before stepping inside, as though unused to being in a place with bright lights and the smell of cooking food that wasn't just smoke from a street fire. When the plates arrived, teeming rice, lentils, and vegetables, Meera placed hers in front of Arjun without taking a single bite. Eat first. She told him softly. Sundar noticed, and without a word, slid half of his portion onto her plate. You need strength too, he said. For a long moment, she didn't touch it. But then hunger overcame hesitation, and she began to eat in small, careful bites. As they ate, Sundar asked about her life. She told him about the tiny room they lived in, how her mother left before sunrise, how she often waited alone for hours with her brother. She spoke of the time she'd walked to the shop with coins in her hand, hoping they were enough for bread or milk, only to be told prices had gone up. And then, with a voice almost too quiet to hear, she mentioned the man again. He comes when Mama is gone. He says we owe him rent, even though Mama pays someone else. If we don't give him food or money, he shouts and scares Arjun. Sundar's grip on his spoon tightened. How long has this been happening? Since last winter, she said. Mama told me not to open the door, but sometimes he comes when we're outside. Sundar knew then that leaving them in the alley was not an option. After the meal, he bought extra food to take with them, along with blankets and bottled water. Meera's eyes followed every movement, confusion and suspicion mixing with a small glimmer of hope she seemed afraid to let herself feel. When they returned to the alley, the sky had already turned dark. The flickering light from a street lamp barely reached their door, but something felt wrong. The door was slightly open. Meera froze. Mama always closes it. Sundar stepped forward cautiously. Inside, the small room was in disarray, the thin mattress tossed aside. The few clothes they owned scattered on the floor, and in the corner, on the cracked wall, someone had drawn a crude mark in black paint, a large X. Meera's voice shook. He's been here. And as Sundar looked around that cold, broken room, he knew this was more than just intimidation. This was a warning asterisk. For a long moment, neither Sundar nor Meera moved. The dim light made the X seem almost alive, like it was staring back at them with silent threat. The air inside the tiny room was stale, carrying a faint chemical smell from the paint, and the silence was broken only by Arjun's soft breathing behind them. Meera clutched her brother tighter, her knuckles turning white. He's never done this before, she whispered, her voice trembling. Before he just shouted or took things. What does this mean? Sundar studied the mark. It wasn't random. It had weight to it, a statement. It means he wants you to be scared, Sundar said carefully, not wanting to frighten her further, but refusing to lie. He wants you to know he's watching. Meera's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She just held Arjun and stared at that black mark, like it was a shadow that had followed them home. Sundar stepped forward, scanning the room. It was clear someone had gone through their things. The small tin box where Meera said her mother kept coins was lying open, empty. The thin blanket that was usually folded neatly on the bed was crumpled on the floor. The only photo on the wall, a faded picture of a younger Meera with her mother, was now hanging crooked, as if someone had grabbed it and then changed their mind. This wasn't just intimidation. This was intrusion. It meant the man felt entitled to their space, their safety, their lives. Meera, Sundar said gently, you can't stay here tonight. Her eyes widened. But ... where will we go? Mama won't know. We'll leave a note, Sundar said firmly. and I'll make sure your mother finds you. But I'm not letting you stay here with that mark on the wall." She hesitated, her eyes flicking between him and the only home she'd known, small and broken as it was. Leaving felt like giving it up forever. But the fear in her eyes told him she understood. They gathered what little they could. Some clothes, the photograph, the medicine, and of course the bottle of milk, still half full. Meera tucked it into her small cloth bag like it was the most precious thing in the world. Sundar wrote a note for her mother in simple words. "Meera and Arjun are safe. Call this number. We will meet you soon." He placed it in the center of the floor, weighted with the small tin box so it wouldn't blow away as they stepped out into the alley. Sundar noticed movement at the far end. A silhouette leaned against the wall, smoking. The man from earlier, his cigarette tip glowed briefly. As he inhaled, the ember lighting his smirk. "Taking them away, are you?" He called out. Sundar didn't answer. He simply moved Meera and Arjun ahead of him, walking toward the street without breaking stride. The man laughed softly. "Doesn't matter, I'll find them." Those words weren't shouted, they were spoken like a promise. Sundar felt a chill in his chest, but he didn't look back. Instead, he unlocked the car and got the children inside, locking the doors before circling to the driver's seat. Once they were on the main road, Meera finally spoke. "He's not going to stop, is he?" Sundar kept his eyes on the road. "Not unless someone makes him." And in that moment, a quiet decision formed in his mind. He hadn't just stumbled into their lives by accident. Maybe he'd been meant to be here, to do something about this, not just for Meera and Arjun, but for others who lived under that. Same shadow. He drove them to a small guest house he sometimes used when he needed privacy in the city. The owner, an elderly man named Rahim, greeted him warmly without asking questions. When Sundar explained they needed a safe room, Rahim nodded and handed him the keys without hesitation. The room was simple but clean. A single bed, a chair, a small table with a jug of water. Meera helped Arjun lie down, covering him with the blanket they brought. He looked a little better after eating, but the medicine would take time to work. Sundar ordered warm food to the room. Meera sat beside Arjun, feeding him slowly, and for the first time since they met, Sundar saw a flicker of relief in her eyes, but that peace lasted only a short while. Around midnight, when the city outside had quieted to a low hum, Sundar's phone buzzed. He stepped outside the room to answer. The voice on the other end was low, unfamiliar. "You have something that belongs to me," the caller said. Sundar's grip on the phone tightened. "You're talking about children? They don't belong to you." The voice chuckled darkly. "You think you can just walk in and take them? This city doesn't work like that. People like me, we make the rules here. And people like you, they learn to stay out of it." "I'm not staying out of it," Sundar said quietly. There was a pause. "Then I hope you're ready to lose something important to you." The line went dead. Sundar stood in the dim hallway, the phone still in his hand, feeling the weight of the threat settle on his shoulders. But instead of fear, something else was rising in him, resolve. He walked back into the room, where Meera had fallen asleep beside her brother. The milk bottle sat on the table. Catching the faint moonlight from the window, he knew what had to be done now, but he also knew that whatever came next would put him directly in the man's path. Asterisk morning came slowly, with pale sunlight spilling into the small guest house room. The quiet hum of the city outside was a sharp contrast to the unease that had settled over Sundar through the night. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the man's voice in his head, the low, deliberate threat. The implication that this wasn't just about Meera and Arjun anymore. When he looked over at them now, still asleep on the narrow bed, he noticed how Meera's arm was draped protectively over her brother, as if even in dreams she was guarding him. Arjun's breathing seemed easier, but his face was still pale, his body fragile. The half-empty bottle of milk sat on the table, like a reminder of how this had all started, and how something so small had led to something so dangerous. There was no more room for hesitation. Sundar pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in low, measured tones. I need information on a man, he told the person on the other end. Lives near the old garment district. Calls himself the landlord of a block of shacks. He's been threatening families. He gave as many details as he could remember. The way the man looked, his voice, the black X mark in the room. The person promised to call back within a few hours. When Meera woke up, she looked around as if unsure where she was for a moment. Then she saw Sundar and relaxed a little. Is Mama here? She asked hopefully. Not yet, Sundar said, kneeling beside her. But we're going to find her. And while we do, I need you to stay here with Arjun. This is a safe place. No one will get to you here. Her eyes searched his face, as though trying to figure out whether she could believe that. He always finds us, she said quietly. Not this time, Sundar replied. His voice was calm, but inside a storm was gathering. Before he left the guest house, he gave the owner, Raham, clear instructions to keep the door locked and not let anyone in, except him. Rahim, a man who had seen more than his share of city. Trouble nodded gravely. Sundar's first stop was the alley where it all began. It was different in daylight, less menacing, almost ordinary, but he knew appearances meant nothing here. As he walked toward Meera's old door, he saw the X still there, stark against the faded wall. The air felt heavier. Like the alley itself remembered what had happened. A few neighbors peered from behind cracked windows and half-opened doors. Sundar stopped to speak to a woman sweeping outside her shack. She was wary at first, but when he mentioned the man, her expression darkened. He's trouble, she said in a low voice. Been here for years. Says he owns the place, but no one's seen papers. He takes food, money, anything he wants. And if someone refuses, they disappear. Sundar asked. The woman glanced around nervously before answering. Some go to live with relatives. Some ... no one sees again. Police don't come here. They're afraid of him, or they work for him. Either way, no one stops him. As Sundar listened, the weight of the situation became clearer. This wasn't just about one man bullying one family. This was a small kingdom built on fear. And he was the first outsider to challenge it. He thanked the woman and turned to leave, but a figure stepped into the alley ahead, blocking his path. It was him, the man from the night before. He smiled, slow and cold, or stupid. Sundar didn't respond right away. He studied the man, the casual way he stood, the faint twitch in his jaw that betrayed tension. I came back because you think you own these people, Sundar said evenly. But you don't. The man chuckled. You have no idea how things work here. These people stay because I let them. They eat because I let them. You're a visitor. You leave, they can't. You're wrong, Sundar said quietly. You don't own them. Fear does, and fear can be broken. The man's eyes narrowed, and his tone shifted, sharp with threat. Careful. You think money makes you untouchable? Money doesn't matter here. Here, it's about who's willing to go further, and I will. Sundar's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't look away from the man as he answered. A voice on the line said, We found him? Names. Raghav. Multiple charges, extortion, assault, illegal eviction. All dropped before trial. Connections to local police and a businessman in the transport industry. If you want him gone, you'll need proof. Thank you, Sundar said, ending the call. Raghav smirked. Friends calling to warn you? Good, let them. You won't last. Here. Without another word, Sundar walked past him. Raghav didn't stop him this time, but Sundar could feel his stare burning into his back. A silent vow that this wasn't over. By the time Sundar returned to the guest house, Meera's mother had arrived. She was thin, her clothes worn from long hours at the garment shop, but her eyes were fierce with worry. She hugged her children tightly, scolding Meera for leaving without her, but quickly turning to thank Sundar for keeping them safe. He told her everything about the threats, the mark, the danger. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of it, as if hearing it aloud made it even heavier. We've tried to leave before, she said quietly, but moving costs money. And even if we go, he finds us. Not this time, Sundar said. This time, we'll end it. Meera looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. How? Sundar glanced at the milk bottle still sitting on the table. By keeping my promise, and by making sure he can't keep his. But deep down, he knew the next step wouldn't just be about protecting Meera and Arjun. It would mean exposing everything Raghav had built in a place where no one had ever dared. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the city in shades of golden shadow, Sundar realized something chilling. The fight was about to come to him. Asterisk that night. The guest house room was quiet, but the tension in the air was thick enough to feel. Meera and Arjun had fallen asleep, curled up beside their mother, the exhaustion of the last 2 days finally catching up to them. Sundar sat in a chair near the window, staring out at the narrow street below, his mind working like a chessboard where every move had to be perfect. He had been in countless high-pressure meetings in his life, billion-dollar decisions, strategies that could make or break companies, but this was different. Here, failure didn't mean losing money or reputation. It meant losing lives. He had already made calls throughout the day to people who owed him favors, to friends who believed in using influence for something more than profit. Evidence had started to come in photos of Raghav's men collecting rent from terrified families, audio recordings of threats, testimonies from people too afraid to speak until they knew someone was protecting them by midnight. He had enough to bring the law crashing down on Raghav. But in places like this, paperwork wasn't enough. You needed timing, presence, and the kind of visibility that made it impossible for the wrong people to quietly make it all disappear. And that meant one thing. He would have to confront Raghav directly, in the open, with witnesses. The next morning, Sundar told Meera's mother to stay in the guest house with the children. No matter what you hear, don't open the door until I come back, he said. She looked at him for a long time, as if trying to decide whether to trust him with not just her children's safety, but their future. Finally, she nodded. Be careful, she whispered. Sundar walked back into the alley just after sunrise, when most people were still inside, cooking simple breakfast or preparing for another day of survival. The sound of his footsteps echoed against the walls. Rghav was already there, leaning casually against the wall as if he'd been expecting him. 2 men stood nearby, watching like guard dogs. You came, Raghav said with a smirk. I was starting to think you'd run off. I told you, Sundar said evenly. I'm not going anywhere. Raghav's smile widened. And I told you you can't win here. You're just one. And no, Sundar replied. I'm not. On cue, voices began to rise from behind the doors and windows of the alley. People stepped out, one by one, women, children, old men, each holding a phone or camera. Some were trembling, but they stood in the open, their eyes fixed on Rghav. A car pulled up at the end of the alley. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, followed by a man in a dark suit. They walked straight towards Sundar, nodding in greeting. Rghav, single quotes us. Smirk faltered. What is this? Proof, Sundar said, simply. He turned so his voice carried down the alley. This man has been threatening families, taking food, taking money that was never his. Today that ends. One of the officers read from a paper, listing the charges. As the words extortion, assault, and illegal eviction filled the air, the crowd began to murmur, their courage growing with every syllable. Raghav tried to step forward, but one of the officers blocked him. You can't touch me, Raghav snapped. I know people. So do I, Sundar said quietly. The difference is, the people I know believe in justice. The officers moved in, cuffing Raghav's wrists. His protests grew louder, more desperate, but the sound was drowned out by something else. Applause. Hesitant at first, then stronger. Until the whole alley seemed to echo with it. For the first time, Sundar saw Meera's neighbors standing tall, no longer shrinking into their doorways. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, her voice breaking as she said, Thank you. No one has ever done this for us. He nodded, but his eyes were searching for something, or rather, someone. Meera. Later that afternoon, when he returned to the guest house, Meera was waiting by the window. She ran to him the moment he stepped inside. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice full of hope. "Yes," Sundar said. "He won't hurt you or anyone here again." Her shoulders relaxed and she looked down at the milk bottle on the table. It was empty now, but she picked it up and held it out to him. "I promise I'd pay you back," she said. "I still don't know how, but I will." Sundar knelt so he was eye level with her. "You already have. You reminded me what a promise is worth, and that's more than money." Her mother stood nearby, tears in her eyes. "We can never repay." "What you've done, you don't have to," Sundar said softly. "Just take care of each other. That's enough." Before he left, Meera ran to the table, picked up the photo of her and her mother, and pressed it into his hand. "So you don't forget us," she said. Sundar looked at the faded image for a long moment. "I won't," he promised. And as he walked out into the late afternoon light, he realized something. He had come into that alley as a stranger with 2 books in his hand, and he was leaving with something far greater. A reminder that no matter how powerful you became, the smallest acts of courage could change entire worlds. For Meera and Arjun, the milk bottle had been survival. For him, it had become a symbol. And he knew that somewhere down the road, their paths would cross again, not because they owed him anything, but because life had a way of bringing back the people who had changed you.